We are live, and it's 10 a.m. in Los Angeles, and it is 7 p.m. in Berlin, and we're talking to Kenny Schachter. Kenny, I think he does not need any introduction. Artist, villain, amazing writer, screenwriter, and a columnist for ArtNet. He just wrote this amazing story for New Yorker magazine, I think, or New York magazine, artist himself, art collector, art dealer, vintage car collector, and chronist of our time and our art world. Let's find him. Okay, it's loading. Hey, Joram.
Hi.
Kenny, how did you cope? How do you feel about my introduction?
Villain? No. I'm only a menace to myself and my family.
So, how have you been?
I'm coping remarkably well. I mean, as best as we can in these highly unusual. I'm in New York City, which I have to say.
Sorry, now it's better. I lost you for a sec.
I'm in New York City.
I lost. Yes.
Can you hear me?
I hear you well. Yeah.
I tell you, in 100 years, when we're communicating in whatever fashion we communicate in, we're still going to have technical glitches and difficulties. I can imagine. Anyway, I'm in New York City, and I tell you, it's not nearly as bad as you would suspect from the media coverage about how the virus has affected New York.
In what sense? You mean in terms of places being open and accessible?
No, I mean, of course, there's more cases here, and sadly and tragically, there's more deaths here than anywhere else in the country and basically in the world right now. But there's more people here living in such a congested fashion in all the boroughs of New York. And as a result, the numbers get exaggerated because of just the sheer number of population in the city. But I mean, the way you read about it in the press, you would think walking down the street, you see bodies keeling over or people bashing on the door to get into hospitals, like in Dawn of the Dead movies. But yeah. I mean, if you go to Central Park, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but if you go to Central Park on any given day when the sun is shining, not today, and you would never know that there's even the slightest thing that's changed other than around 50 or 60% of the people wearing masks.
Oh, that went quick. Here most of the people don't wear masks still.
Oh, they do here now. And a lot of grocery stores now are making it mandatory to access grocery stores to wear a mask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's also into the whole coalition between citizens and population and infected is very marginal still, of course. But the question would be if without all these measures, it would be probably in the giant numbers. But you told me on another note, and you also wrote about it in your ArtNet article. You went to make a test before they were pro domo available, but they're not really available, right?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's like the hierarchy in any given society. Everything is about access, whether it's being able to buy a coveted work of art that you want, or with anything, medical care. Unfortunately, in this society, it's still very much driven by how much resources you have and what relationship you have. If you have a doctor with which you have a close relationship with, you can get a delivery of a test administered by a doctor, albeit in a hazmat suit. So, I mean, I've had 2 tests. One of my sons has had the virus and still has it nearly a month later. He's been twice tested. He still has it. and I've been tested and don't have it, nor did the other kids I have.
So he's completely in isolation?
Well, fortunately, he's in an apartment with a few other kids that are all quarantining together. So it reminds me of like an MTV reality TV show in which they're all squirreled up in this little, holed up in this apartment, and he's able to work and carry on with his life, thankfully.
But this means the others also have, they also tested positive?
No, everyone else in the family is negative.
But I mean the ones he's quarantined with?
Well, you know, they were all exposed to him to such an extent they decided to just stick it out together.
Ah, okay. And does he have symptoms? How is he doing? Is he doing all right?
He's doing fine, thankfully. I mean, the main symptoms he had were the loss of taste and smell, which is something you hear regularly about some of the kind of what the classic symptoms of this disease, sickness. He had a cough, he had restrictive breathing, but thankfully it never got terribly bad. But it's funny when you hear that the saying of having good taste now is being completely altered. Whether someone has good taste now, people have no taste.
Yeah. I saw some very funny memes of someone one symptom is having no taste, and then the course collector rubs his head and thinks like maybe maybe I'm infected. And tell me, what's your
there already?
Sorry?
I said, are we going there already?
Yeah, what's your so what do you predict? You know, how you think this whole art world will be infected by the infectious disease corona?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question, of course, and everyone's guessing, but I'm kind of cynically idealistic in general about life. And we've been through wars that have been catastrophic in the death toll into the 20s, 20 million in Russia alone in World War II. And I don't want to get the numbers wrong and be Trumpian in my fake news recounting. But World War II saw literally tens of millions of deaths. And the plague in 1918 saw between 50 and 100 million deaths. And I think like cockroaches and hermit crabs, which I made a photograph of some years ago and deposited them in New York City. But I think people are very resilient, human nature, and I mean, we've been causing a lot of damage to the environment and to various species of animals, including ourselves. But I just think we're very resilient, and like a rock in a stream, think we'll get out of this. I don't doubt it for a second. And I'm not going to say that things will ever return to 100% normalcy the way they were before this all started, because clearly we've experienced some fundamental paradigmatic changes in our behaviors. Like people will probably never shake hands again, and people will always be leery of being too close to each other, more so than ever before. But I think in terms of, I mean, look, I think that this whole process has accelerated the use of technology, and how, I mean, I'm teaching a class at the School of Visual Arts on Zoom, and I didn't know Zoom used to be a TV show when I was a child on public broadcasting service, and that was about as much as I knew of it. And I just think like we wouldn't be having this talk today on this Instagram platform were it not for this situation and pandemic. So I think that it's accelerated our usage of technology and familiarity with it on every different kind of generation. And I think like people have very short memories, like I mentioned in my last piece. And I just think that things will get back to some semblance of normality a lot sooner than later. But there'll be subtle and not so subtle differences to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just had earlier this afternoon, I had a private tour. I mean, I do this regularly on Instagram, but that's our viewing room. And we had a call here. It's still my tripod, which sucked and kind of fell down all the time. But we had this choreography where all the sales staff was giving a short introduction on each. All of the directors picked one artist, and it was amazing. And the feedback of the people was like that they did not learn in this short, it was only 30 minutes, that they did not learn before so kind of deep dive into one artistic practice. And now we're going to build it out and be more. What I really, I mean, my mission in any case was always be very transparent about a lot of things. And I think that this, what it enables is that so many people can participate and have access to information at the same time, which I like. I really, I mean, because I mean, you're like known for being someone who shares all this intel, right? And how did that come actually?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I've been writing since the early 90s, but I never really had it. No one really ever read me. And the iPhone only started in 2007, and Instagram, which I think is the largest technological shift that I've seen in 30 years in the art world, where we used to have to send photographic slides to communicate visual imagery to one another. But when I resumed after ArtNet magazine, which I began writing for in the mid-90s, almost for close to 10 years, and then the company pulled the plug on the magazine from one day to the other and left Walter Robinson, the founding editor, without a job. And as a result, he resumed his painting career, and he fared very well because of this kind of having suffered this setback in his career. But then he became a kind of, paintings resumed, his career started on a whole other level. In any event, I restarted in 2012 writing again. I took a little break for a few years. And after the advent of the phone, my audience grew. And I had always been doing the same thing, writing about just the machinations of the art world. Really, there's been a continuous thread with my artwork, with my curatorial work, with the writing. Everything I do is just sort of related to the kind of ecosystem of the art world. And it's such a unique environment that's so utterly different. I've been a lawyer, I've been in the fashion world, I've been in the stock market on the floor of the American Stock Exchange, but really the art world is not only a language unto itself, but it's an existence unto itself. And the behaviors are so unique. And I guess as I continued to do it, after the phones made my work a lot more accessible, I started to get feedback when I would go to an art fair or go to wherever, walking down the street. I started to get this, the more I was revelatory, the more I was kind of naughty and the stuff that I was talking about, the more positive feedback I got, and the more affirmation I got, the more it egged me on to kind of outdo myself each time. And I just figured at my old age, and with the fact that I've been doing this for so many decades, and I survived with a combination of writing, teaching, but mainly just selling bits and pieces of an art collection I accumulated over 30 years. And as a result, I'm beholden to no one and have no ties to anybody. So I just started doing this, and the feedback was so fantastic from my students, from the readers. And the more people said, like, thank you, you're one of the only people that actually, tell the truth, basically. I mean, it's funny because people complain about the news, and honestly, CNN is such a propaganda machine, and it's just as bad as Fox News. One's a platform for the president. The other one is so adamantly anti-Trump, it makes you almost sympathetic for the horrible person. But the art world is the only field that embraces lies. You go by, I'm not talking about you, of course, but if you go to any art fair and interview all the dealers, you'll get like one basket of lies after another. No one tells the truth. And it's almost like the nature of this business is not to be forthright with people. So I never set out to be like stealing information from rich people and giving it to like aspiring rich people, like some Robin Hood figure, but I just did it. And the more people just thanked me and showed appreciation, or the fact that they even bothered to read it, just made me take it further and further, to the point I've had death threats and people trying to beat me up in public and lawsuits threatening.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of interesting is that it continues the mission of ArtNet, because what ArtNet did is, there's this funny story by Hans Neundorf that he said there were these buildings or like traders which went up and down in gallery buildings selling from one floor to, like, of course, like established secondary market positions to another dealer in the same building on another floor, because there was no price transparency whatsoever. There was like a vague idea of what's been traded for what amount, but they could go and sell, I don't know, Rauschenberg collage to another dealer because they were asking way more money than another dealer on another floor. You know, so it's a lot of people can't. I mean, I opened the gallery 2002. There was a auction market transparency existing then, but it just had about to begin. You know, so it's really it really changed. And how with your own artistic practice, when did that started?
Well, I mean, I used to curate hit and run shows throughout the 90s in temporary venues, starting in 1990 with German art. But I always sort of like, I mean, the curatorial projects were in a way like to create a context within, because I never took an art class in my life until I started teaching them, no one would ever take my work seriously, and I don't take myself seriously, generally speaking, on any front. But the fact is that I would put my work into the shows that I was curating amongst my peers. And I just really, I mean, because I had other ways to make a living and I didn't have to rely, I was dealing and doing part-time jobs and by any means necessary to survive. And as a result, I just continued to make art. I never stopped, but I never did it more. I mean, I've only been more serious about it in the last like 3 or 4 years that I've had opportunities have presented themselves really as a result of my writing that I was given. Because I embed these videos and two-dimensional works into my articles, I've created this kind of platform for myself where I can present not just my writing, but my visual stuff, having like almost a one-person show digitally every month in ArtNet.
I'm very impressed with these collages. Are you all doing them yourself?
No, my attention span is pretty much like a flea unless I'm writing or preparing for my lectures. In fact, this entire morning, I just viewed every abstract painting that Gerhard Richter has ever made in his career in preparation for my 6-hour class tomorrow. But I have one person helping me for 15 years. And recently I've started with, I mean, I used to make videos in the more analog days. And John Kelsey, who's part of Rena Spalding, he was my cameraman for the films that I were making. And Jonathan Horowitz, the fabulous video artist, was the editor for the work that I made. And when things went digital, it's actually Casper Strock, who's the husband of Gabriella Monroy, who's been the only really assistant off-site that I've ever had long-term. And they helped me with the works.
So they also helped you with the Damien Hirst skull going down the Catalan, flushing down the Catalan toilet?
Yeah, I can see them. Oftentimes I shoot a lot of stuff, and then they help me with the coding part, with the programming and the 3D software.
And like the where you mocked yourself into my technical glasses, that's also you did. They did this for you?
My assistant. But
okay.
when I saw that great image of you with that eye testing thing, it really made me think. I mean, you've written this amazing book, The Blind Art Dealer, and knowing your whole history, and I have great admiration for what you've done and how you've done it. But I mean, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I started like doing research. I think I even contacted you, and it made me think of this kind of saying you hear over and over again in the art world in particular, like you have a good eye. And I've heard this throughout my career, and I always used to make a repost and say like, a good eye isn't enough. You need 2 good eyes. And then I was thinking, like in your case, you have you have this impairment, and you've risen above it gigantically. And I'm not sure that either of your eyes are terribly good these days. And I know you've been through a series of surgeries, and I'm by no means making light of the fact. But then I was thinking, like, where did the saying "a good eye" comes from? And in a sense, there's like a biblical reference to having a good eye. It's a blessed is he who has a good eye. It makes someone more charitable. They have an eye towards helping other people. But also, when you think of traditionally like an artist, I'm not a painter and I could not paint a stick figure. When you see traditionally like an artist standing back and closing one eye and holding a thumb up and sizing up their paintings, and in a way, like even like the term good eye means to focus on the minutiae, to focus on particular details. And again, like I know that you can see work when you screw your face up really close to it, which is, I mean, we're both wearing glasses and we both have some degree of a sight issue. And every single day of my life, I rub my nose up against the painting. to see the detail. But then again, I was thinking again, like it made me think of Duchamp and his statement that art is that he was trying to get away from beauty in art and the traditional notion of beauty and the retinal aspect of art.
Yes.
And then again, then I was thinking, like, instead of like, because you have an eye situation, you have a great brain and you need a brain. But even taking it further, it's not even, you don't need to be erudite. You don't have to be the world's foremost genius to appreciate art if you're fully blind or not. But it's really the desire and the passion. And my whole career is that if you could boil it down to one word, because I'm not the brightest, don't have an art education whatsoever. I'm completely self-taught. I teach still at the University of Zurich in the Executive Master's Program. And for the first time in my life, I've been teaching this studio program at School of Visual Arts, but it takes passion, plain and simple, and your desire with your family background. And I'm so in awe and admire so much the fact, like, your sheer determination created for you this kind of your career and your galleries, not just one. The scale of your galleries are amazing. I was thinking before of art fairs, and everyone's talking about, oh, who's going to go to an art fair and what's an art fair and how is this whole, I'm running on and on and on, but that's because no one listens to me in my house, so all I ever do is talk. But like, I was thinking like about your art fair booths in fairs. And this is like, when you go to, I mean, people could slag off Larry Gagosian from here to eternity. And I've done it myself in my writing, that to the point where he used to hate me, but now he quite appreciates what I do. But he's a self-made person who's done some of the most profoundly extraordinary historical museum shows that have ever been erected in a private space.
Absolutely.
On the payroll. But like, when you go into a Gagosian booth in any given art fair, there's this kind of indescribable electricity, a palpable sense of like something happening. And you're one of the few people besides him. Like, I mean, I'm in a bit of a thing with Sadie Coles. We had a little bit of an issue in the past couple of years, but like when you go into one of your booths, no matter what fair it's in, you could almost, without even looking at the sign, know it's your booth, because you have this crazy kind of energy going on, and it's contagious, and it's pretty special. Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I also must say that Larry Gagosian is a real, I think that he is really an amazing figure, because he has not the background I have or David Zwirner has, that we come from these like big German.
And Ivan Wirth with his family, his wife, his family situation where he was buying art for his wife's museum. All of those people come from these very privileged and entitled backgrounds.
Yeah. And interesting is, you know, my father worked for David's father.
Oh,
and yeah, he was his first assistant or something like this. So, but anyway, I mean, that's also a bit of a problem, all these comparisons always. But anyway, I think that Larry is really, he kind of built an art world, if you like it or not, which is really amazing. And I find it straight out honest in the way that it tries to be. It is upfront commercial, which I think is very nice, because I think there's nothing worse than pseudo-intellectualism. But talking about art fairs, which I really wonder is, you know, it's this, I made this, I think with Tim Blum yesterday, we made this analogy of, you know, it's like committing a crime, and only if everybody shuts its mouth, you get through with it, you know. But if one bails, like snitches and gets a Crown witness program, we're back to like everybody else is like screwed. So I wonder how this whole, eventually it's all going to be again as it used to be. You think it will change? Do you think this whole art fair situation will change?
Well, I didn't quite get the whole criminal metaphor that you just said. Although I certainly know a lot of criminals in our world. But...
No, the analogy is that, so 3 commit a crime, you know, and they get caught, and there's only evidence if one of them or 2 of them, if they confess. And if many dealers would say like, okay, you know what, everybody complains about art fairs all the time, but nobody stops it. And I think it would only work if we would all stop it, you know. But then there will be always one who will take the advantage and say like, oh yeah, but you know, I don't know, she filed the application, I didn't know about it.
Yeah, but it's funny because everyone complains there's too many art fairs and too much travel, and now everyone complains there's not enough, and people start to miss them. And I think art fairs are a necessary evil. I don't necessarily think they're a bad thing. I mean, I lived in London for 15 years. If you wanted to see a half a dozen galleries in the East End, I mean, I timed it one time from my house to see Emmeline Gallery, a great young emerging art gallery. Yep. It took me 2 hours and 45 minutes door to door to see one show. So there's something to be said for going. Auction previews are a fantastic, accessible place to get up close and kick the tires of art. You can touch things, you can rub right up against things without the authorities cracking down on you. And look, art fairs, I've had great experiences and great discoveries and great conversations. I always say, like, there was the Michael Moore movie where he spent like 2 years trying to find the chairman of General Motors, and he could never find him. And if you go to any of these big galleries and try to find Larry G or David Z or Hauser, you'll never find these people. But at least on the first or second day of every art fair, there's accessibility to all the staff. You can have a conversation with them. You can ask the prices of things, even though most of them have a fatwa against me and won't give me any of the information. But the fact is, like, you know, there's something to be said for the ease in terms of like just seeing so much in the most condensed period of time. And in no way is it a substitute for an art gallery. I never would say such a thing. But I think, like, let's say Basel happens in September. I mean, I for one would love to go, and I was planning on participating in the June fair, which is an alternative fair started by a Norwegian gallerist. But you have to wonder, like, who's going to get on a plane in September and risk, when everyone is talking about the potential for a relapse of the virus, who's going to get on a plane and fly from all over the world to be the guinea pig that's the first one stuck on a plane and the first one stuck in a convention center, you know, in light of all of this kind of great contagious nature of this sickness, who's going to want to risk it? It's going to take years before there's 15 ancillary fairs in any county during Basel. People are going to be very slow going to get started, but they will.
But I think, you know, I love Basel the most because it's so focused on art, you know, much more than any other fair. And I can even walk you blindfolded the first floor and tell you where which gallery is and so on. But I think the problem of, it's not complaining about travel and so on. I think what it is with the art fairs, which is like the new fact that art is so expensive. It is expensive because we have this mega gallery here, you know, and then we have super trained and super experienced staff, which is paid adequately. We have productions, infrastructures for artists, and then of course on top comes the art fair, and then to balance out, only to balance, you need to start with a certain price point, and then the art visible on an art fair is the art getting sold, and then that's also, I mean, maybe we need more niche art fairs, you know, more you know, like less top level art fairs. I just think that the spiral is kind of it's driving the price curve, you know, and I wonder if that's always the best, you know.
I mean, when people speak about how art is not expensive, it's a misnomer to think. I mean, you can, first of all, there's been all of these art websites. I write for ArtNet. ArtNet started the price index, which is, like you said before, gone a tremendous way in making the pricing of art more transparent and more accessible. Nevertheless, I mean, there's Art3 and Panel 8 just went out of business, and ArtNet that I write for. But basically, all of these, I don't think there's ever been an art-based platform that has a viable business model. I think they all pretty much suck. Even the one, I mean, I write for ArtNet, of course. I appreciate the fact that they continue to give me a platform there. But really, I mean, just between me and you and whoever's might keep it amongst ourselves, half the content is paid for. I mean, all of these sites, They're terrible. They all suck. None of them are ever going to make money. And Hans Neuendorf, like I always say, the only thing worse than being behind the times is to be too far ahead of the time. So there was a period during the dot-com boom where ArtNet shares were flying in the 90s, but then that all came to a grinding halt, and they're all scraping for money. And I don't think Artsy has ever made, I mean, I'm going to get in trouble. Of course.
Oh, by coincidence, the connection is in trouble now.
I don't think Artsy ever made $1 in the existence of that company. It's been a black hole to suck up investor money. Instagram, on the other hand, has been, for me, 30 years I've been doing this. And like I said before, if I wanted to communicate or pitch a gallery or a museum for a show, I'd have to take an envelope and stuff it with 20 slides, and more than likely, I mean, I remember Hudson from Feature Gallery was, not only was he the only gallery in the recession of the 1990s to entertain the fact of looking at unsolicited material, he would actually critique each and every slide with a red pen, like symbolically, but otherwise most galleries would take the envelopes with slides and throw them in the garbage. I remember walking down the street in Brooklyn and people would shove slides into my hands because I was curating emerging art shows. But what I'm saying is, is that Instagram for me has been this absolute hierarchical busting wrecking ball, and it's changed my life. I mean, my kids say I'm like wildly over addicted to it, and if any of you follow me, I apologize for taking it a little too, spending countless hours these days more than ever, unfortunately for all of you. But I mean, I have discovered so much art, and I have collected. I mean, I curated a booth in the Felix Art Fair, back to art fairs in Los Angeles in February. And of course I had to do it in the most unorthodox and unprofessional, sloppy fashion. But besides showing people like Bjarne Melgaard and various artists that have had more experience showing, I showed 6 out of 11 artists I found on Instagram. And I bought art for $500 to $1,000, great things, and met extraordinary people on Instagram. And we're doing this on Instagram. And I just think like, people, the familiarity with people feeling more comfortable with this format is really skyrocketing. And for me, this has been probably, if I had to settle on one change in the art world in 30 years that really moved me, changed the way I experience art, buy art, think about it, see it. Of course, nothing will ever substitute putting your nose in front of a painting. But nevertheless, Instagram is something where you can find art, of course, for $1,000 or $200.
But you know what I started? I don't know if you saw it. I started. So when the crisis hit us, and we closed the gallery like in a rush with everybody else. We also thought, why do I do that? There's no need to do it. But then we did it anyway to flatten the curve and so on and so forth. And then I was sitting here and said, like, okay, how can we connect now? And then I thought, because one thing is to look at collectors' houses and see what they got and so on, which is the hit on this live show. But then also
around too.
Yeah, but we saw that already at Anita's walkthrough.
Oh, sorry.
No, but then what I did, I started an open call.
What?
I started an open call, and I went live, and artists could just apply for joining, and then I randomly picked them. I had really no idea who they are. And I saw really amazing work. I saw work of artists. If I would be a beginner, I would show. It was really interesting. And what we're going to do now of this open calls, we're gonna do a group show in the London Gallery of the best of the open calls. Could you follow?
Well, I just think, I mean, I agree 100%. I just think that, we have all these prejudices about, back to like the site issue. I mean, I seem to be the least used organ in the art world today. And everyone is like, I've always been teaching art and economics and seminars and theory classes, but this is I have to say, like, one of the foremost experiences in my career that I've had is teaching in fine art students, seniors, in this fine art workshop at SVA. And I've come to I always say, like, I never get to speak about art, about the content of art, because I work in the art world. And nobody wants to hear about, like, what this means, what that means, why did an artist do this, the process, the concept behind things. everyone just wants to know, like, where are they showing next? What biennials are they in? Who's buying it? I mean, the critics have lost their teeth. I mean, I revere Roberta Smith so much. She's made me weep on more than one occasion, and I just have such reverence for her. But I mean, collectors are the new critics, and private museums really just, for the most part, get on my nerves. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but like, unless you're in a jurisdiction where there are no museums, like the Marciano Museum in LA, the staff tried to unionize and they went out of business. I mean, with all due respect, who the fuck cares about, you know, curatorship without scholarship? These people start collecting, and 10 years later, they open up a museum and they're sucking away the audience from LACMA and MoCA in Los Angeles. Even the Broad Museum, all of that work would have gone to LACMA, or he was on the board. And then he opens this kind of night sale museum. And I'm not, you know, there are some wonderful artworks in this museum, and the gesture is fine. But like, do we really need a museum in Los Angeles after these public institutions have painstakingly built up their constituencies over years? Private museums make no sense, and they're now giving, like, you know, imprimatur. Their imprimatur is affecting the way what art we see. Like, you know, the Rubel Museum, again, like, I have great respect and admiration for the Rubels, and when they started in Miami, it was barren landscape. But I mean, now they changed the name from the Rubel Blah to the Rubel Museum, and there was like a Chinese room and a Japanese room and a black room. And it's just kind of, and then they have one artist staying there. I mean, maybe I should shut up, but like.
No, but I think I understand what you mean, and sometimes I think that is right, and that it's not substantial enough. But I find it actually, it kind of goes a bit against other things I would have interpreted your opinion about, that it's kind of very liberal and everybody should try to find its own luck and.
Yeah, but I mean, when I don't care if my kids sell my whole entire collection before my body gets cold. I mean, I just think as an art collector, you're charged with, I mean, you don't own art, art owns you. You're only, I mean, I've damaged way more art than my kids over the course of my life. And I think as a collector or as a supporter of art, you're charged with the responsibility to make sure it doesn't get damaged. I mean, that's pretty much it.
You know, Gerhard Richter, Gerhard Richter said, any good painting ends up in a museum anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's of relevance, it gets there.
Yeah, but I mean, if these private collectors are trying to find tax loopholes and open museums in either in central locations where they're literally competing in a zero-sum quid pro quo game where, like, you know, one person's audience is at the expense of another audience, that's if you have a museum in China where there aren't enough contemporary art museums, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're in the middle of a major jurisdiction that has fantastic, painstakingly built museums, painstakingly built audiences, when you have something like the Marciano Museum, if you're going to spend the day at the Broad and the Marciano, you're not going to go to LACMA and MoCA where they're curating.
Yeah, but I think you can leave that to the spectator. You know, I think the more the merrier, and everybody, you know where they go? They go to the ice cream museum. This is where they go. No, look, really, it's the most popular museum of all museums.
I'm very laissez-faire, and I think people should do whatever they want. I mean, if people placing undue restrictions on buyers of art, and look, if someone buys art from your gallery and sells it a week later, you're not going to deal with them again. But for you to make them sign a contract in perpetuity, putting restrictions on fair trade, on the resale of art, that's bullshit. I mean,
we don't do that. We don't do that. And our strategy is actually, we rather sell more and just buy it back in case it gets sold, instead of like always being too stingy about what we sell. We rather sell it and just look after the market and make sure
right.
it sells again.
Like, if I bought a Caterina Grossa from you, a sculpture that was, if I turned around and sold it a week later, you would just never sell me another piece of art again, or I would lose the trust and the mutually and the respect that we have for each other. But nevertheless, these types of situations, I just think as someone who makes art and sells my own art pieces, if someone wants to sell my art 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, that's, when you sell something, in my mind, you let go and you're putting it into the stream of commerce, and then whatever happens, happens. You can't put undue restrictions on things, and I don't really care. You know, as long as, and if someone else wants to buy it, I'm always so grateful and so thankful that anyone would even want to bother, that I just couldn't care less. like I said, like if I buy a young artist and sell it a week later, then no one's gonna sell me art, and I'll have a bad reputation. And I never understand why there's so many people that act so hideously in our universe. Because, like Rosemary Truckle once said to me in the '90s, and it still applies, even though like there's been more growth in the art world in the past 25 years than the previous 250 years. But she said to me then, because we got into a little argument, if you can imagine someone getting into an argument with me, but she said the world is small and the art world is minuscule. And I mean, it's, even though it's exponentially vastly increased over the decades, it's still true that it's a very much relationship-based business. And that's why, like, you know, like, do you ever think about what would happen to your gallery if you were no longer amongst us? Like the succession plan. I just think galleries, like Roberta Smith has said, like they're really businesses that don't have, you know, there's no sort of way to continue the business, the continuity from the thread of one generation to the next. They're not really something you could pass on to other people, whether it's Gagosian, Hauser, or any of these other places, other than to family members.
I mean, yeah, but I think that Mark and Arne Glimscher, they seem to do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it only works from family to family. I mean, I assume that what happened to Knodler, that's something very likely no one would do to their own. I don't know. Inigo did that to his family name.
The gallery never made $1 other than when they sold fake art in the end. They never had one profitable year that wasn't substantiated by, but that's another story.
No, but that's what I mean. You know, it's like one. I only learned that way later in my career that it's meaningful to have this background also, because eventually you don't fuck around with that unless you want to ruin the brand reputation. You know. So because I mean, all we have in the end in the art world is also a little bit the reputation.
That's 100% all you have. I really think, I mean, you have the artists you work with, but I mean, when you're showing less established artists, the reputation of the dealer is equally as important. I mean, if you're starting with an artist that no one knows about, people are buying as much you and the imprimatur and credibility of what you've done in your history as they are the actual art itself. I mean, that's one of the variables that constitute value in emerging art, is
absolutely
not only what the art is or the fabrication or these things that go into pricing an artist that is first getting started. Half of it is who's showing it.
Yeah. So let me see if there's some questions, but I think we should do that. We should make that to a regular. We could go on and on and on. So exciting. What do you see as challenges now, and what are solutions?
What was that? Challenges.
What do you see as challenges now, and what are solutions?
I mean, the challenge has not changed one iota. I mean, this is another thing. People have always been complaining in the last 5 years about the struggles of small to mid-level galleries. And this drives me nuts, because I was curating in the early 90s and 300 galleries closed in Soho alone. And during the 2008 crisis, it was nowhere near the scope of the 90s crisis. So really the challenge has not changed since day one. If you're starting a gallery with unrecognized, non-money secondary artists, it's going to be a struggle, and the challenge is to survive. I mean, the business model really doesn't make much sense unless you're collecting the art of the artists that you're working with, and you have not one but two good eyes or a good brain or everything and lots of passion. But the challenges are just, how do you make a living in this? I mean, the whole economy has come to a grinding halt. And what's going to happen in my life, in your life, I don't know where my next money is going to come from or when. I'm hopeful and I'm trying, but it's very difficult. Thank God for teaching. And I recently wrote this article for New York Magazine, which paid about 10 times the rate of ArtNet. But so it's always been a vast challenge to try to make a living in the art sector unless you're one of the big people. And that will never change, whether there's a pandemic or not. It's always the same. But now we really do have a mid to small level gallery crisis. I don't think we had the slightest one before. I just never believed it. And I did this gallery talk lecture in Barcelona, and I was speaking to Lisa Spellman from 303 Gallery. And then we started discussing the fact that there's wonderful small galleries that have been thriving before this whole thing happened. in every country, you know, and all over the world there are fabulous galleries that are making a go of it, and there's also people that are having difficulties, and that's always going to be a bell's curve of success, and it's never going to change, and it's never going to be easy. And now, like, I mean, I was speaking to one of the head of private treaty for Sotheby's yesterday, and I was saying to him, like, how are you ever going to have an auction if no one's going to sit in a sales room, and half of it is like a pissing match or showing off or conspicuously spending money in public. But he feels that they can carry on a night scale on the internet. And like I just think, you know, people will have to utilize technology and utilize the means at hand to make things happen. But, you know, and for me, I just would espouse Instagram as a great way to platform.
We're gonna hear from someone at Sotheby's who's responsible for the online sales. And I think they do it. I got totally into a buying rush the other sale, because then it's like so easy, handy to keep on bidding. I found it way more dangerous than being in the auction room.
Wait till I have the sale at Sotheby's.
Sorry?
Go ahead. What's the question?
Oh no question. Oh, but this is old man talking. I'm under 40 here, and the white is missing.
Someone's making fun of me, my age.
That's so mean. That's so mean.
It's probably Inigo Philbrick trying to.
Yeah, everybody who hasn't read that, I found that really an amazing story. And what made it so special, I think, is that you were so honest about it, and that you were so honest about, like, that you also kind of lost a friend. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I did business with him, and it was probably the only time. There were a few good years where I think that he was functioning truthfully, to whatever extent one does in our world. But I think he had some good years, and then he went south in terms of his integrity and ethics. And the problem with your world, it's not that it's so unregulated, because like Georgina Adam gave a lecture and said there's 165 different laws that pertain to any commercial transaction. Whether or not they're stated, they're statutory, like anti-fraud regulation and misrepresentation laws and statutes. But I think that, you know, how many artists today that are represented by galleries are underpinned by a contractual relationship? I would say like 90% of artists do not have contracts with the galleries that represent them, and that breeds a lot of opportunity for people to be less forthright than they would necessarily be if things were more controlled. So I think Indigo took advantage of the fact that, I mean, unfortunately, you only read in the newspapers like when a painting sells for $450 million, and as a result, all of these finance people decided to like start to loosen the restrictions of giving loans on fine art, and he took advantage of that by using the same collateral half a dozen times and selling. I joke that I can't sell one piece of art to one person, and he sold the same piece of art to 5 people. He was such a good salesman at it. But I just think it's a factor of greed, this whole thing, and there's always going to be a bell's curve of criminality. It's part of greed, and this was really nothing more than a classic sense of, like, you know, someone becoming inherently dishonest for the sake of short-term gains and greed. But back to the auction, back to just one diversion. I had a sale last year in December, an online-only sale called The Hoarder, because when I moved, I've been collecting for 30 years, and I have hundreds of things. And I had an online auction of 115 lots with no reserves. And I felt that it was a really, like, you could have picked up something that previously sold for thousands for literally a few $100s. And for me, it was a great way to sort of create opportunities for people that couldn't afford art or couldn't afford the art they wanted, and democratize it in a way where I said, like, my loss was their gain. And while some things did very well, a lot of things I never really even bothered to tally what the proceeds were, because I was just happy to get an infusion. But I'm sure at best I broke even, but it was a great opportunity and no one got hurt in it. And there were some people that raised complaints about the fact that there were no reserves, so any bid would win a piece. And I'm going to do it again as soon as things clear up a little bit, sooner rather than later. like you said, I mean, I just think there are people that have resources and life carries on. People are still buying art and they'll never stop.
But I think that you would have not reached that overall result if you wouldn't have done it that way.
Right?
Would be my assumption. I think that the overall result of that sale would not have been this result if you wouldn't have done it the way you did it with no reserve and as a kind of a marketing stunt.
Well, I mean, it was hardly a stunt because I could have ended up falling flat on my face. And I mean, a lot of things could have gone unsold, and then it would be an albatross around my neck if no one bought something that had no bottom. It wasn't a marketing stunt. It was done in
okay, maybe stunt is not the right word, but like the it wouldn't have gotten this attention.
Well, I mean, I have to say that I didn't. I mean, it's funny because when I posted the auction online, I mean, it ended up getting picked up in various publications. Like it was a novel thing to do. But I have to say, like, I wish I was clever enough to think that it was a stunt or a good marketing move, but it never occurred to me. When I moved, it took 4 people 4 months to dig out of the mess because I'm such a hoarder. I thought one day, like, I had stacks of old newspapers and auction catalogs and art magazines and car magazines and mixed up with paintings and drawings and books. And I just love to surround. I'm a maximalist. And like
I mean, I personally, I liked it. And I think also it's way more, you know, they hire Kim Jones to create a sale. And then only later I realized it was created by Kim Jones. You know, it's like, so they use a big, very important and amazing fashion designer, get him in as a curator for an auction, this is a marketing stunt, you know? Okay, now I understand the meaning of stunt.
I was going to say on my Instagram page, the actor, there's a podcast called Talk Art, which is quite good. And it's run by Robert Diamante, who works with Carl Friedman Gallery, and also this actor, Russell Tovey. And Russell Tovey, who I don't know from a hole in the wall, he wrote on my Instagram page that my auction was shameful because I was selling stuff with no reserve. There were pieces that I owned for 30 years in that sale, and I still have literally over 500 things, if not close to 1,000. I've never tallied them other than any event. He wrote it was shameful for me to sell stuff and expose artists for having their work sell so cheaply. But the fact is, I mean, when I started in art in the 80s and early 90s, nobody gave a rat's ass about contemporary art in America. It was the market was like, you can count it on 2 hands at best. No, it's become, in spite of itself, in the last 5-10 years, fashionable, where people like Kanye say he would trade 2 Grammys to be taken seriously. And all of a sudden you have this actor who has a very good livelihood from his career, and then he weasels his way, excuse me, I mean, I don't know him, and I'm sure he has good intentions. But for him to accuse me of being shameful because I'm selling art, none of which I've owned for less than 4 or 5 years, some of it I've owned for decades, for him to say it was shameful to expose artists for selling into the hundreds, it's really not going to affect the career of an artist if something sells a little bit inexpensively on a one-off. And for him to say that, and subsequent to me fighting with him so publicly on Instagram, I heard back from 2 dealers that he had bought stuff and only recently flipped it himself. So, I mean, the hypocrisy in the art world is probably the one thing that I rail against. And it's been like undermining not underpinning. Everything I do is just based on kind of revealing. I mean, this world is replete with hypocrisy to an extent that I've really kind of never seen before.
It's funny, you know, because I'm kind of starting a bit like to lecture here, startups, because the only industry with money we have in Berlin is a startup industry. And so these folks, you know, sold companies and made some money, and they think like, okay, what about artwork? And the question number one is understandably is, okay, I get it, I buy it, but how can I sell it? And I think that this question is very important and legit, because if you're not talking about, and I asked them, I don't know, 150,000 euro, 200,000 euro on things, and of course they want to understand where's the money, you know, and what will happen to it, you know, and that's why I think it's art needs to be resold. And another learning we have from this conversation is that you read the comments on your Instagram feed. So,
well, I mean, I work by myself. I don't have any audience. My kids won't listen to me anymore, nor my wife. I don't have a gallery where people are coming and going all the time. Or like, I mean, the only thing I would miss about having a gallery or being in that position is the constant stream of communication. I have no one to talk to.
Oh.
But I just love the sense of community that I get. I mean, Vito Acconci, who was one of the artists that probably impacted me the most besides Paul Tech, but Vito Acconci spoke about this kind of lack of community as people in big cities segregated themselves from each other. There were no more public squares and no more places where Instagram is the only kind, and besides the fact I've met such truly extraordinary people and accessed people that I've had the greatest admiration for, met people from 15 to 100. I mean, it's really the only platform I have to speak to people. And I get back to every direct message. Anyone who's not like a serial killer who wants to meet, I meet with people. I give advice. I feel compelled to write what I write. I feel it's my obligation to share whatever it is that I know, as little as it is or unimportant. I don't take myself seriously, but when I teach, when I lecture, I used to lecture every 2 weeks. I mean, I was probably on a plane for the last 10 years, every 2 to 3 weeks of my entire life. And on that note, it's probably like, it's amazing that the environment is getting better. Animals are springing forth in places they never did before. And it's a great way for humanity to take stock of where we are, just amongst our families, our friends, our relations. But for me, if it wasn't for Instagram, I would be sitting by myself in the corner, rocking back and forth, like probably in a mental institution. And the fact is that it gives me, like, I just love the feedback I get. It helps me become a better person, a better artist, a better writer. If I make one mistake or one factual, it's the greatest, like, reality testing machine ever known to humankind. Because if you ever fuck up or do something wrong or something, you know, that crosses the line, because I like to push things as much as I can, I get feedback. And if someone explains to me something I did which is wrong for whatever reason, I will certainly readdress it, rethink it, and oftentimes remove it. If I've done something.
No, I think also it's good. And of course, it's always a big risk, no? Doing something, you risk something, but doing nothing, you move nothing. So I think we have to make this a regular. The line will be cut off after an hour. I learned that now as being an Instaman. And Kenny, that was so great. There's so many things we didn't talk about. We have to date in the future. One last thing, what should we look at digitally?
What should you look at?
Yeah, share with us, like some insight.
Well, I mean,
listen to the. Oh, actually, there's one amazing podcast I listened to with Adam Lindemann. Yeah. And then Adam Lindemann explains that he was sitting in his art fair booth and how humiliating it is to be sitting in an art fair booth. I really like that one.
That's a terrible thing to say. I mean, I've done a load of art fairs. When I first moved to Europe, I ingratiated myself into the art fair universe, just meet people in Europe. And I did 7 art fairs in 2004, although I was thrown out of a couple of them. But I think being in an art fair is a beautiful place. You're like a city, like a hood ornament on the front of a car, and you're exposed to people and you have the most beautiful conversations. I mean, Adam Lindemann is a great guy. He's done some great shows, but he also comes from a tremendous family.
I think it changed, Kenny. It might be like this.
I don't think it's embarrassing to sit in an art fair. I think it's
not embarrassing. Maybe I
did Felix in February. It's difficult, but there's nothing wrong with it.
No, it's just very intense. Very intense.
It's intense, but it's good intense.
But you have some digital recommendation?
Just troll on Instagram like a lunatic. I mean, I'm not big on podcasts. I tried to go to a viewing room and they requested all this private information to sign in.
We don't do that. We don't do that. We reveal all prices, all data, everything. You don't need to put your email in. Just come check it out. You don't need to leave anything. No password barrier at koeniggallery.com.
I mean, there's a great website called artsorg.com, arts.org, where they cull articles from all over the world on the visual arts. I'm more reading stuff than looking.
Right, I don't
get excited by by online viewing rooms right now, I'm afraid.
Okie dokie, Kenny. Thank you very much. And let's redo this next week.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Ciao, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
speaking
watching.
to me.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi.